The words hung in the air, thick and metallic, like the taste of pennies. It's all going to be investigated. Every last cent. Sarah's voice, usually a saccharine weapon, was clipped, almost professional. I looked at her, then at the man in the sensible tweed jacket who sat beside her, his expression a study in polite neutrality. He was the reason she'd invited herself over this morning, the reason her eyes held that particular glint of self-righteous triumph I'd come to know so well. I'd thought he was just some acquaintance she'd picked up, a sympathetic ear for her latest manufactured grievance against me. My nonprofit, the beacon of hope I'd poured my life into for the last 5 years, was a meticulously crafted structure of late nights, cramped office spaces, and the unwavering belief that I could make a difference. My days were a kaleidoscope of grant applications, volunteer coordination, and the quiet hum of gratitude from the people we served. Most of those people were rebuilding lives from the ground up, men and women who had found themselves adrift, seeking solace and a second chance. It was a good life, a hard life, but a life I was proud of. The contrast with Sarah, with her inherited complacency and manufactured drama, was a chasm I'd learned to navigate with a practiced, weary grace. She'd always had a talent for finding fault, for picking apart anything I built, especially if it seemed to bring me genuine fulfillment. There was the time, years ago, when I'd finally saved enough to buy a small, fixer-upper cottage. Before the paint had even dried on the "sold" sign, she'd shown up with brochures for a luxury condo complex, subtly implying my choice was beneath me, that I wasn't aiming high enough. Then there was the incident with my grandmother's antique jewelry. After Nana passed, and while the will was being settled, Sarah had borrowed a particularly exquisite sapphire brooch, claiming she was just holding it for safekeeping. It reappeared months later, pawned, the money unaccounted for, her explanation a convoluted tale of an unexpected bill that had just slipped her mind. She never apologized, of course. Apologies were for people who admitted fault, and Sarah was a master of deflection, a virtuoso of victimhood. She could twist any situation to make herself the aggrieved party, leaving me to clean up the emotional debris. I'd learned to let it go, to chalk it up to her peculiar brand of jealousy, to focus on the good work I was doing. It was easier than fighting a phantom. This morning, however, the phantom had a name and an official-looking badge tucked into his tweed jacket. The air in my modest living room, usually filled with the comforting scent of brewing coffee and the gentle murmur of the news, had turned frigid. Sarah had arrived unannounced, as usual, her face a mask of concern that never quite reached her eyes. She'd sat on my sofa, sinking into the cushions with an air of weary martyrdom, and then, casually, as if discussing the weather, she'd introduced him. "This is Mr. Abernathy," she'd said, her voice laced with a false deference. "He's with the IRS. He's looking into some discrepancies." Discrepancies. The word felt like a physical blow. My nonprofit had always been transparent. Our books were audited annually, meticulously reviewed by an independent firm. Every dollar was accounted for. But Sarah, she specialized in creating doubt, in planting seeds of suspicion. She'd been subtly circling my organization for months, asking invasive questions disguised as casual curiosity. How do you track the donations, exactly? Who approves the expenditures? Are you sure you're not missing anything? I'd brushed her off, telling myself she was just trying to understand, to connect with my passion. Foolish, I now realized. She wasn't trying to connect, she was trying to find a way to hurt me. Mr. Abernathy cleared his throat, his gaze fixed on a spot just over my shoulder. "Your sister," he began, his voice measured, "has provided us with some detailed information regarding the financial operations of your organization. She has expressed significant concerns about potential mismanagement and improper use of funds." He paused, and for a fleeting second, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not sympathy, but a trained, professional curiosity. Sarah, meanwhile, was watching me, a tiny, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. It was the same smirk she'd worn when she'd accidentally on purpose deleted my meticulously prepared presentation for the community fundraising gala last year, forcing me to scramble and redo it in a single night. The silence stretched, taut and suffocating. I could feel the blood draining from my face. My gaze darted between Sarah and Mr. Abernathy. This wasn't just about Sarah's usual petty jealousies anymore. This was an orchestrated attack, a full-scale assault on everything I'd built. She hadn't just reported me, she'd brought the ounds. The sheer audacity of it, the cold, calculated malice, was staggering. She'd weaponized my life's work, my commitment to helping others, and turned it into an instrument of her own warped sense of justice. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not my sister, but a stranger, a predator disguised in familial affection. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely heavy, as if I were wading through molasses. "Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "I welcome a thorough investigation. My organization operates with the utmost transparency. All our records are available for review." I turned to Sarah. "And you, Sarah," I continued, my voice devoid of warmth, "have a lot of explaining to do." The next few days were a blur of controlled chaos. Mr. Abernathy was polite, professional, and relentless. He asked for documents, for financial statements, for every shred of paper that proved the integrity of my work. I provided it all, calmly, efficiently. While he sifted through my carefully organized files, I didn't sleep. I replayed Sarah's accusation, her smug confidence, the way she'd presented herself as a concerned citizen rather than a vengeful sibling. The betrayal cut deeper than any insult she'd ever thrown my way. It was a violation of trust, a desecration of the very principles I lived by. I remembered another instance, a few years back, when I'd been struggling to find funding for a new outreach program. I'd poured all my energy into it, believing it would make a significant impact on the local homeless population. Sarah had found out about a potential corporate sponsor I was courting. Instead of offering support, she'd somehow gotten hold of their contact person's private email address and sent them an anonymous note, hinting at my questionable financial practices, and advising them to exercise extreme caution. The sponsorship, predictably, evaporated. I'd suspected her then, the insidious way she operated, but I'd had no proof. I'd mourned the lost opportunity, the setback, but I'd pressed on, finding alternative, albeit more challenging, avenues for funding. This time, however, I wouldn't just press on. This time, I would dismantle the narrative she'd so carefully constructed. While Mr. Abernathy worked, I began my own quiet investigation. I didn't have the power of the IRS, but I had something Sarah always underestimated: meticulous attention to detail and an unwavering commitment to truth. I went back through old emails, text messages, and financial records. I cross-referenced dates, names, and figures. I spoke to a few trusted former colleagues, discreetly asking about Sarah's past behavior, her tendency to embellish, to invent. The picture that emerged was one of a woman deeply insecure, whose life was a constant performance designed to elicit admiration and pity. The day Mr. Abernathy finished his review, he came to my office. He sat across from me, his posture less formal this time. "Ms. Thompson," he said, his voice holding a note of respect, "I want to commend you and your organization for your impeccable record-keeping and the transparency of your operations. Your sister's concerns were, frankly, unfounded." He slid a thick file across the desk. "This is our official report. Everything is in order. There will be no further action required." He looked directly at me then, his gaze steady. "I can't speak to your personal family matters, of course. But from a professional standpoint, your organization is exemplary." A wave of calm, cold relief washed over me. It wasn't triumph, not yet. It was the quiet certainty of a battle fought and won on my own terms. I thanked Mr. Abernathy, my voice steady, and he left, the official report a heavy, silent testament to Sarah's failure. The real work began then. I didn't confront Sarah immediately. I didn't need to. I knew her pattern. Once her initial assault failed, she would retreat, regroup, and likely try to enlist others in her campaign of slander. My family was a fertile ground for such manipulation. My mother, always eager to avoid conflict, would probably try to mediate, to smooth things over. My cousins, easily swayed by Sarah's dramatic narratives, would undoubtedly take her side. Instead, I drafted a letter. It was addressed to Sarah, and to a select few members of my family, the ones I knew would be most receptive to the unvarnished truth, and the ones Sarah would likely try to turn against me. The letter didn't scream or accuse. It was factual, methodical, and devastatingly calm. It laid out, with irrefutable evidence, the timeline of Sarah's actions, the anonymous tip to the IRS, the discreet inquiries she'd made, the documented instances of her past attempts to undermine me. I included copies of my correspondence with Mr. Abernathy, the official report, and even excerpts from our past financial audits, all demonstrating the soundness of my nonprofit's operations. I didn't send it directly. I sent it to my attorney, with clear instructions. He was to release it to the specified recipients, not as an attack, but as a clarification, a necessary response to misinformation that has been circulated. The fallout was immediate, though not in the way Sarah likely imagined. There were frantic texts, confused phone calls. My mother called, her voice trembling, asking what was happening, why Sarah was saying such terrible things. I listened patiently, and then, with quiet precision, I responded to each concern with the facts I had so carefully gathered. I didn't defend myself, I simply presented the truth. Sarah, on the other hand, disappeared from my phone. The usual barrage of passive-aggressive texts ceased. When I saw her at a mandatory family gathering a few weeks later, her face was a mask of thinly veiled fury. She'd expected tears, apologies, perhaps even a desperate plea for reconciliation. Instead, she saw a woman who had weathered her storm and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. Her usual social currency, her ability to manipulate and elicit sympathy, had been devalued. The flying monkeys, the family members who usually echoed her grievances, were silent, their loyalties wavering in the face of irrefutable evidence. They'd seen her for what she was, a saboteur. My mother, bless her well-intentioned heart, tried to orchestrate a talk. Sarah refused, of course. She couldn't face the quiet condemnation in my eyes, the knowledge that her meticulously crafted lie had crumbled. The IRS investigation had been her ultimate weapon, a move so drastic it had backfired spectacularly, exposing her malice rather than my supposed wrongdoing. She had sought to ruin me, but in doing so, she had exposed herself. The social consequences were quiet but profound. The hushed conversations at family dinners, the averted gazes, the subtle exclusion from gatherings, Sarah, who thrived on attention, suddenly found herself on the periphery. Her reputation, once carefully curated, was now tarnished by her own actions. I continued with my nonprofit, the quiet hum of its operations a steady reassurance. The betrayal still stung, a dull ache beneath the surface, but it no longer defined me. I had faced my sister's poison, and instead of succumbing, I had turned it into a potent antidote. There was no grand pronouncement, no cathartic scream. Just the quiet, resolute certainty that I had defended my truth, my work, and myself. The satisfaction was not in her downfall, but in the absolute, undeniable clarity of her defeat. The silence that followed her accusations was the loudest victory of all.